Good evening, saints. Let's open up to 2 Kings 25, and we'll conclude going through the text of Kings. Lord willing, this evening we'll reach the end. We'll have a few sessions of review and an opportunity to look ahead to certain things before we move into our next book. But it's been quite the journey through the book of Kings, and we've reached here to a sad end. We've seen that after the reforms of Josiah, he came to a sad end. He died at the hands of Necho, the king of Egypt. And after him, we have a series of 4 kings called evil by the Lord. And then comes Babylon onto the scene to take even the men and women of Judah away into captivity. So we mentioned the name of these 4 kings last week, and I want to make a final summary of what's happening in these final days of Judah. Jehoahaz, remember, after Josiah was killed, the people of the land made him king. That's chapter 23, verse 30. And he was immediately imprisoned by Pharaoh. And one of the things we didn't mention last week, but that's good for us to remember, is this book is ending with Israel in bad relationship with Egypt. Remember anything from the beginning of the book that might serve as irony? There's some mention of Egypt at the beginning of the book that's very ironic, that when things seem good at the beginning of the book, now comes the end of the book and Egypt is treating Judah not so nicely. Yeah, that's right. That's what I was thinking of. Everybody hear that?
No. Pharaoh had given his daughter to Solomon.
That's right. Solomon married the daughter of Pharaoh. And the idea behind that politically is, well, this will give us good relationships with Egypt, which is our neighboring superpower. So Solomon did what seemed politically expedient. And so by the time we come to the end of the book of Kings, it's the author's way of showing the irony that what Solomon put his trust in foolishly, though he was the wisest man that ever lived, his foolish decision at the beginning of the book served to be of no benefit for the people by the end of the book. Okay, so I think a good principle we can take away from that is don't do what seems wise in your own day, because at best it will last your lifetime. It's no guarantee to be of any value to the Lord and his people. And that's what we see here at the end of the book. After Jehoahaz, we hear of Jehoiakim, who was put in place by Pharaoh. So first Jehoahaz, and then probably his brother, it looks like, Jehoiakim, was put in position to rule over Judah by Pharaoh. And he taxed the people to send the taxes to Egypt. So Jehoahaz and Jehoiakim were under the authority of Egypt. But what we read as we come to chapter 24 is of Jehoiachin. Right? Jehoiachin, in his days, Babylon comes into power. And he's taken captive, this next king, he's taken captive by Nebuchadnezzar, and the temple is plundered in chapter 24. And the king of Babylon makes Zedekiah king. So that's where we ended chapter 24, with Zedekiah being made king, and he rebels against Babylon. So all of these kings, seemingly, except the ones appointed, or even the ones appointed by these rulers, are in rebellion against these foreign kings. Now, what we saw of Zedekiah, let's look here at the beginning of chapter 25. Nebuchadnezzar and all of Babylon come and they surround the city. And verse 3 says, there was no food for the people of the land. Of course, this is another detail of irony because the land of promise, when it was promised to the people, was described as a land. How did the Lord tell the children of Israel? What were they thinking when they were going to the promised land? It was a land flowing
With milk and honey.
with milk and honey. And there was promises of all the vineyards that they didn't plant, of all the trees that they didn't plant. Right? All the things that was speaking of abundance and material blessing and prosperity. And so now what we're reading in the bitter end of the days of Judah, they're surrounded by a foreign army and there's no food for the people of the land. Remember, there were the realities. We said the blessings fall into three categories. Okay, that's the third one. There's not any official order. So remember, this isn't the 4 P's. This is talking about the categories of blessings that come from the obedience to the laws of Moses for Israel. Huh? Kind of. They're all P's. Kind of. They're similar wording.
Fertility in the land.
Yes.
Children in the land.
Yes. Kind of. So number 1 is possession of the land.
Yes.
Number 2 is prosperity from the land. And number 3 is progeny, meaning offspring in the land.
Yes.
Possession of the land, prosperity from the land, and progeny or descendants, offspring in the land. And so the promises or the blessings that come to Israel through obedience to the law given through Moses generally falls in these categories. These are the material blessings that are mentioned. So what we're finding here in chapter 25, when Babylon comes to judge them on behalf of the Lord, remember this is Yahweh sending judgment. Babylon is his instrument of judgment, just as Assyria was his instrument of judgment before that. What we are seeing is the removal of all of those blessings. And more than that, we're seeing many of the curses that were promised in the law given through Moses as well. Verse 4, 2 Kings chapter 25, verse 4, it says, the city was broken into, and all the men of war fled by night by way of the gate. Now, this is a very discouraging, probably the most discouraging thing you could see. If you were the people inside the city and you hear that the enemy is broken in, then you see the men of war, the fighters, are fleeing. So this is in part a slight reversal. I don't know if the author has this in mind. I couldn't see any other details within the text itself, but it reminded me that the warriors of this day are not like the mighty men of David's day. Remember, 2 Samuel ended with a list of David's mighty men and all the mighty things that they did. So we're seeing cowardly warriors in this final moment. Perhaps the enemy was so great they knew they couldn't overcome it, but whatever it is, they didn't stand and defend the people, they fled. So we're seeing a cowardly defense. Notice the detail in verse 4. They fled by the way of the gate between the 2 walls beside what?
The Jericho.
I'm not sure, Sister Greta. Is that verse 4?
I read further down, so I know they fled
Yes.
to Jericho if they were
Yes.
captured.
Yes.
Is it the king's garden?
That's right, the king's garden. So in verse 4, so they fled by the gate between the 2 walls besides the king's garden. This is a special use of this word garden, and it's used one other time previously in the book of Kings. Anybody remember a garden being involved? Yeah, so it's used in the passage that commonly we translate the vineyard, but it is the garden, Naboth's vineyard. Okay, and so this is 1 Kings 21. It's 1 Kings 21, verse 2. I think, Chelsea, you were saying vegetable garden, right? Did I hear you? It's verse 2. Ahab spoke to Naboth saying, give me your vineyard that I may have it for a vegetable garden. Okay, so that's the word, that's the use here. And what we see Ahab with his wrong desires, we see, if you remember, Jezebel helps him get that plot of land before she meets her end. But what we're seeing here is in Judah, there is this type of garden that the king has, and the men are fleeing away from this garden. But the other usage of this word before this, so there's one use besides this one in the book of Kings, and the only previous usages, there's a few future usages in the prophets, but the only previous usages before this in our Bible comes from the book of Genesis. You can guess where we see Genesis.
Genesis
Yeah,
3.
that's right. So it's going to be primarily in Genesis 2 and 3. Plus,
Yes.
if you look at Genesis 13, when Abraham and Lot were deciding to separate, Abraham looked, or first Lot looked, and he saw the valley, and it was
Yes.
well watered. And it says it appeared to him as the garden of Yahweh, meaning paradise, the Garden of Eden. So what Lot looked up and saw in Genesis 13, and what was there in Genesis chapter 2 and 3, the word for garden, is what the word used here. So I think the author is drawing this idea that in fleeing, in leaving behind Jerusalem, they're leaving behind this connection, at least this thematic, theological connection to the Lord's purposes, the place that he had established, the purposes that were first there in the Garden of Eden. So the people are losing this connection to God and his purposes when they flee from the land. And so the author chooses to use this special word here. Yes. At the oak of Mamre. Different word, but the angel of the Lord appeared him to the oak there. Yeah. Garden, maybe into the translation, but in the original, this word is gan. So gan, it only appears here and in the other passages we mentioned. So they're fleeing, but then the Chaldeans, the other name for the Babylonians, they capture them. They capture the king. Sister Greta said at Jericho, that's verse 5, they capture them. They run out past this garden, and in Jericho, they capture them, and they pass sentence, and they take Zedekiah and his sons, and they kill them there. Remember, this is where we ended last week, and we were saying the great difficulty, the great heartbreaking reality here is if the king and his sons have died, that's a seeming end to the line of David. Somehow, since the days of David, regardless of the enemy, regardless of the sin of the kings, God has always preserved for him a seed of David. And so the book comes here to an end. Now we'll have other books to study, and we'll see how the Lord resolves this difficulty. But just think, this is the experience of the people who are living and those who are reading this book. This seems, the author doesn't give us extra hope, this seems as though the line of David has failed. I want you to think how serious, how significant this is of a moment when those who are in captivity are reading this story or hearing about this or considering what has just happened in their days or in the generation before them. They're saying, God made promises to David, and it looks like those promises have failed. So what does a people do who have heard what God has promised them and who has experienced all of these things? They know they're guilty, but they're questioning, even though we're guilty, is our sin so bad that God's promises to us are taken away? Has God forsaken us because of our sin? So this is a tremendous moment. Any thoughts?
I would say no.
Yeah.
Because
One
God
second.
is
One
in
second,
a
Lee.
very-
Sorry.
Oh,
Let me come back to you, Brother Norman. Start. I'll get you in just a second. Yeah. Why did they take out his eyes? That's a good question. So in verse 7, the way it reads to me is the last thing they wanted him to see was his sons being killed. So he saw his sons getting killed, and then they took out his eyes. So the last sight that they would have matches the emotional experience we're having when this chapter is being read. Is that's the end of the line of David. So the last thing he sees is the death of his sons. There's no sons after him who are going to reign. And so that's the last thing he sees. And this is the final chapter of the book. So it's the last thing we're hearing is the end of the line, as it were. And so it's a very dramatic thing. So I think that's what's happening there. Lee, you were going to say something, brother?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Brother Norman. I couldn't hear anything. That's why I started talking. So my apologies on that. But yeah, I said I don't think so. I think the Lord kept his promise because he said, obey me and you will be blessed, and disobey me, you will be punished. So the people disobeyed the Lord in a lot of ways. And God is a God of his word. So
Yeah.
I don't think he fell short.
Yeah, that's a really good observation, and it's making us address something that we've talked about a few times, not very regularly, but what Brother Lee is identifying is the Mosaic covenant that was given says, if you obey, I will send blessings, but if you disobey, I will send curses. But there are at least two other covenants at work regarding Israel, and those are non-conditional covenants. Okay, so the Mosaic covenant we say is conditional because if you do this, then I will do this. But there are at least two other relevant covenants at work that are non-conditional or unconditional. What are those two other ones? Yeah.
The Davidic
Okay, so
covenant.
Sister Greta named one is the Davidic covenant. Right? You have the other one? The Abrahamic. Right. Good.
Covenant, yeah.
Yeah, so you all know. Quickly
But
to
Samuel-
review. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt
No
you, but
problem.
the Bible says you must wait and see the salvation of the Lord.
Yeah.
So if they waited patiently, in the end they would realize that the line of David was actually preserved.
Correct. We're going to see that in our upcoming studies. The weight that we're considering is what's presented in this chapter. This is a striking way to end a book because it seems as though hope is being extinguished. There's a slight glimmer of hope at the end of the book, but this is a very dark thing, and we'll make mention of that. But let's consider these two covenants that we're naming. Quickly, can someone tell me some of the unconditional promises that God said to Abraham? He never says, Abraham, you have to do this. He says to Abraham, I will do this. What were some of those things God named to Abraham that he would do?
A father of a nation.
Okay, so he'll make him a father of many nations. That's one. Goodly. What else? Sister Greta, you had something?
He would bless them, and his descendants would be a blessing to all nations.
Good. I will bless you and I will make you a blessing, and in your offspring or seed, all the families of the earth will be blessed. Good. Brother, right? You had any more?
The land,
Right. Go to the land which I will show you. Yeah.
is the battle for the seed of the land of Israel. By the way, we're going to place right?
Yeah.
And in Islam, we're taught, the Bible is clear in Genesis that the promise was through Isaac. And the Muslims are taught it was through Ishmael. That's why they claim that Israel is their enemy.
Yeah.
Right now, they have very little of what God is.
It's true. What God said to Abraham in Genesis 15 as very large borders, and even if we consider the borders of the kingdom in the days of Solomon, it never reached the extent that was described to Abraham. So what we are seeing is there are promises that God has made to Abraham that has not yet, even at the highest days of the glory of Israel under Solomon, never reached the fullness of the promises to Abraham. So that was one. That was one set of promises he made to Abraham that hasn't been fulfilled and seems to be failing because of what's happening in the book of Kings. What about the promises made to David, the unconditional promises? What were some of those promises? Yes, Sister Susan? Yeah, really good. So this is the most important one, which says one of your sons will sit on the throne forever. Good. Anything else? It's all related to that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Brother Simon?
Yes, Brother Dalton.
Yes. One is when not one of his word will fall on the ground to the ground.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Good.
also the promise, God, God, He did not fail.
Good.
If anything, the people fail.
Right.
God, God always keeps His promise, but they failed God.
Good.
Not God failed them.
Yeah. Really good.
Mhm.
Good. So the way Dalton is setting this up for us, he's saying regarding the promises made to Abraham and to David, not a single word of the Lord will fail to come to pass. He's reminding us the same things that the children of Israel who are experiencing these days, as well as those who are reading about this, maybe they were born in captivity and they heard from their fathers, this is what happened. This is why we're born slaves here. And they have to understand, God has made promises to us. We failed, but it's not the Lord who has failed us. So that's good reminders. Okay, so let me just summarize quickly the promises to David. There's one of your descendants will always sit on the throne, and he will build me a house. That was important. We thought we saw that in Solomon's day, because Solomon
If
was
they
the
did
exact.
not obey, he would punish them.
Exactly right. So that's what we're seeing here, and that will help us move down to the next section of 2 Kings 25 is if these sons disobey, I will punish them with the rod of men.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing as the punishment, verse 8 through 21, is about the temple and about the city of Jerusalem. So what we are watching in these verses, chapter 25, 8 through 21, is God's faithfulness to the promise he's made to David and the covenant through Moses and the promises to Abraham. What's happening is because of the disobedience of the sons of David, he is disciplining them as well as the whole nation. And what's happening is the good things that Solomon did in the building of the temple and the good things that were done by some of the kings who had the proper reforms, like Josiah rebuilding and restoring the temple, these are being undone. What we are watching is the temple being disassembled piece by piece. Verse 8 says, came to Jerusalem 9, he burned the house of Yahweh and the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem. Verse 13 says, the bronze pillars, anybody remember for 50 points of extra credit, don't look it up, the names of these pillars? Mike got one of them. Yeah. Boaz and? Boaz means strength. All right. If I remember correctly, it's Jacin. Jacin, right? I'll look it up as well. I was hoping somebody would tell us. But these are the two pillars, and these are described in 1 Kings chapter 7 when the elements of the temple are being described. And here what we're watching is some of the earliest details of the building of the temple are these pillars. And now what we're seeing is the final details of the temple here at the end of the book is they're being carried off, right? So it's signifying that every detail, every good thing that was done has been undone. So that's really discouraging. That's a very souring taste in the mouth. He goes on and explains, verse 18, that they take not only the elements in the temple, but the chief priest and the second priest and the three officers of the temple. So the first, the second, and the three officers of the temple. So it's seeming to be they take everything that's there, the people, and he took the official, verse 19, the city. From the city, he took one official who was overseer of the men of war, and 5 of the king's advisors who were found in the city, and the scribe of the captain of the people army, and 60 men of the people of the land who were found in the city. And he brought them to the king of Babylon at Riblah. And verse 21, the king of Babylon struck them down and put them to death at Riblah in the land of Hamath. So Judah was led away into exile from its land. So what's being described is the best material from the land was being sent out. the leaders of the people were being put to death, but also the best people of the land. That's like what we saw with Daniel and his friends. The best human resources of the land were also being carried away into the into captivity. So that's the end of Judah as a nation with a son of David sitting on the throne. We're looking at here in verse 22 to 30, just a few sorrowful details to note here as we come to the end. Verse 22 says, "As for the people who were left in the land." That's a sad statement. As for the people who were left in the land. Now, verse 12 tells us a few details that last week we named it, but who were these people that were left in the land?
Poor people.
The
just
poorest
to,
people.
To do the soil.
Yeah, the poorest people of the land, to be
Right.
vine dressers and plowmen.
Right.
Now, that's a difficult thing. Before we just consider the final section of the chapter, I want to consider what life for these poorest people left just to do this manual labor of the land, what that condition is like. They have no great education. They have no great lineage even. Their families have been taken off. They have nothing, not a single thing that they can name as their own possession. Everything they belongs to Babylon.
Babylon.
So, yes, they're destitute. Now, what do you think? I'm going to tell you that I think there is a great privilege that is afforded to this people. Do you see any privilege that they have? Okay, that's
They could
one
make
great
the land
privilege.
prosperous again.
Okay, so Brother Norman said they were still in the land. So that's, we can say, like possession of the land. Sister Greta said they could make the land great. So perhaps they could make the land prosper.
Prosperous again.
Brother Alfred? Okay, so they have food because they're working the land. Yeah. Yeah.
They probably could have children in the land too.
They might be able to have children in the land. When we read the book of Jeremiah and a little bit of Ezekiel, we see that's exactly true. So what I'm suggesting here is theologically, these people who were left in the land serve as something of a channel whereby the blessings of the Lord might be restored. Those who were taken off into captivity had their lives, but they're people that were here, left in this land. They were poor, they had nothing. All of the material blessings that were supposed to flow through the obedience to the Mosaic covenant, they lost. But because they were still there, those promises could be accomplished through the Lord at a time of his choosing. Now, I want to make a parallel, and I'll explain that it's not a perfect parallel. But we should understand that oftentimes in our lives, maybe as a congregation, we won't be in the greatest season of prosperity. Maybe we're not alive during the days of Solomon. There have been many times people have spoken to me about, I remember in this church that it was like this. There were so many people that we didn't even have enough parking. Well, that was the days of Solomon. There were so many people that we used to have fire violations because we used to set up chairs in the aisles. Well, those were the days of Solomon. There are some times we find ourselves, we're not living in the greatest days of prosperity. It seems like we're in those destitution days. We're in those days where we're barely getting by. And the requirement for us is to say, well, did God have a plan for these people who were seemingly left behind, seemingly thrown by the wayside to have nothing? Did God have a plan for them? Was there some privilege for them? Brother Rhett, you had a question?
Sorry.
Brother Rhett, you had, for some of that, the tail end of some of those things. Well, people, I think so. Back in the late 90s, yeah. Sister Greta, you were asking?
Somewhere in Jeremiah, I think I read where it says, if they stayed in the land,
Yes.
the Lord would bless them and he would restore them.
Yes, good.
But
So
they had to stay in the land.
Yes, so that's going to be Jeremiah 40 and then 42. We'll talk about that in just a second because in chapter 40, it's mentioned by Gedaliah, who's coming up in verse 22 onwards, who Gedaliah tells them, well, let's just talk about it now, but I want to conclude what we're saying. We are finding ourselves in many ways. Some days there are some things here at the chapel that are better than they've ever been. But some things are not as good as they once were. So this isn't one universal decree about the condition of our chapel. But the question is, when we find ourselves in low points, when we find ourselves in situations where it seems like we're just having the barest remnants, does God have a purpose in those things? Does God have a plan for the lowliest people who are seemingly left with nothing while everybody else has been taken away? And the challenge for us as a congregation, this is rhetorical. There's no answer you need to give. I just want you to meditate on it. Okay, so this week, think. If we are saying we know how the people of God who are reading this book, the people who are in exile, how should they read this book? Well, very easy. We could say, well, they should have hope. They should trust God. They should have faith that God will be true to his promises. And that's easy for us to say to them. The question is, how are we taking these things in the situations we find in our assembly? Are we willing to be like these poor laborers and say, well, I don't know. I can't even think how God will fulfill his promises, but he's left me here to do a job. God can build up to the fulfillment of all of his promises by me being faithful to dig this land today, for me to faithfully water these small plants, to cultivate these vines. My small work of labor that seemingly produces nothing glorious is God's plan for how he is going to fulfill all of his promises in the fullness of his glory. And that is a wonderful privilege for these people. There is a great privilege to being the weakest who are left to do God's work when no one else is there to do it. It's a difficult reality, but it's a true reality, and we need that sometimes for ourselves in the things that we're doing here as a congregation. Any thoughts on that? Yes, Brother Norman.
I like your thoughts. When we are in a situation where we don't even see the heart any kind of hits, you already get hit. We are in the line. And there's something about him.
That's right. That's right. We have so much, but sometimes it seems like, hey, there's not much we can do. We'd like to have so many wonderful things as a chapel. We'd like to be doing so many fantastic things. But perhaps our days are not to be like the days of Solomon. Yeah, Brother Dalton.
Yes, you know, the people, what you say, leave,
Yes.
the poorest people,
Yes.
I think, you see, the poorest people, what they are, I think they're humble. Because being as they've been poor, they've been humble.
Yeah.
Because it made them be humble. And also, they had life. You know?
Yeah, so it's a good observation because the Lord Jesus himself also said it's hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. So maybe being poor allows for some humility. It doesn't guarantee it though. Okay, so let me read you the final verses of this chapter, and we'll see that being poor doesn't automatically mean you're humble, but it is easier to be humble when you're poor than when you're rich. So let's read these verses. I'm going to read the conclusion of the chapter from verse 22 onward. It says, now as for the people who were left in the land of Judah, who Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, had left, he appointed Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, over them. When all the captains of the forces, they and their men, heard that the king of Babylon had appointed Gedaliah governor, they came to Gedaliah at Mizpah, namely Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, and Johanan the son of Kareah, and Sariah the son of Tanhumeth, the Netophathite. I think I got that. Netophathite, and Jaazaniah the son of Maakathite, they and their men. Okay, so that means there's a bunch of people who came when they heard Gedaliah who had been appointed. And verse 24, Gedaliah swore to them and their men and said to them, and remember, he's repeating what Jeremiah chapter 40 says and what Jeremiah himself prays to the Lord in Jeremiah 42. Jeremiah 40 is the parallel for this section. Jeremiah 41, I don't know if it's 40 or 41, but the people kill Gedaliah, and then Jeremiah repeats these words in chapter 42. But Gedaliah, verse 24, says to them, he swore to them and their men and said to them, do not be afraid of the servants of the Chaldeans. Live in the land and serve the king of Babylon, and it will be well with you. So he's saying, you haven't been taken off into captivity, but stay here. Stay in the land, and it will be well with you. Verse 25, but it came about in the 7th month that Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, the son of Elishama, of the royal family, came with 10 men and struck Gedaliah down so that he died along with the Jews and the Chaldeans who were with him at Mizpah. So we find out that these are men of the royal family. They were named in the previous verses, but now we're finding out they're men of the royal family, and they kill Gedaliah. And we're thinking, well, maybe they're doing something good because they're saying, well, here's a person who was appointed by the Babylonians who's not of the royal line, and we're going to kill him and not submit to the Babylonians here in the land. But we see something wrong here. Verse 26. Then all the people, remember these are the people who were left behind, all the people, both small and great, and the captains of the forces arose and went to Egypt, for they were afraid of the Chaldeans. Jeremiah in chapter 42 tells us this is the wrong thing to do. They killed Gedaliah because they didn't want to hear what he had to say about remaining in the land under the Babylonians. This is a difficult reality because it is hard to be where God puts you in the midst of difficulty. I think we all realize that, right? It's hard to be in many of the situations we have as a congregation, especially when we remember the wonderful times. Do you think anybody was thinking about leaving Israel in the days of Solomon?
No.
You think there was any exiting, emigration out of Israel? There's probably a lot of immigration into Israel, right? The Queen of Sheba was coming. There was having a lot of people coming to visit Israel. But now what we're finding by the end of the book, people are trying to get out of there. Well, that's how it is. When things are going well, it's easy to be where God's work is being done. Really, it's easy to be where God's work is being done and everything's going well. But the question is, yeah, Brother Dalton.
Would you say they're being ungrateful then?
Well, that could be there. I know for certain, the author says, for they were afraid of the Chaldeans. So the main consideration is afraid of Babylon, but in the sections in Jeremiah, we're saying they realized that they could have safety, security in Egypt. So they were not willing to be in the difficult situation God called them to, because they thought Babylon is a great enemy, so let us go to Egypt where there will be more peace. There will be at least food. And this is the same attitude the people in the wilderness with Moses had. At least we had leeks and garlic in Egypt.
Right.
At least we have food. Why did you bring us into the wilderness to die here? Okay, so they didn't want to stay in the wilderness in that generation, and here they didn't want to stay in the promised land in this generation. They'd rather go to Egypt than be in the difficult places the Lord has put them. That's a challenge for us. Yeah, Brother Lee.
It just came to me here. That can really speak volumes to the world outside. They'd rather be stuck in their ways than following the Lord's prayer, like the Lord's word. So we have to acknowledge that and show them the wrong of their ways, by making giving them the word so they could come to that realization.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely right. There is a great possibility for the people to, and we see some of this being done in the days of Ezra and of Nehemiah, how the Lord's people serve as a testimony to their neighbors. They're still hated by their neighbors, but they serve as a testimony to the Lord's faithfulness to the people watching what's being done. And that's possible because there was a remnant, not only a remnant from the original captivity, but a remnant from the remnant after they left to go to Egypt, a small portion of the small portion. So a fraction of the people that stayed and remained didn't give in to their fear and didn't give in to their pursuit of ease or comfort, didn't follow either extremes, but stayed where the Lord put them. They were the ones who were used by the Lord to bring about the restoration in the days of Ezra and Nehemiah. And so it will be for us, the Lord's people, who will be used to bring about the purposes of God in the proclamation of the gospel. Mike, you were going to say?
Yeah, another way that they bring about like the testament to the Lord, the remnant there is like one of the curses of the covenant is that they will become a byword to the other nations around them. So like their purpose is to be like a reflection of God's glory to the nations, that they might many nations might be blessed and come to know, and they still will serve that purpose, except now it'll be to serve the purpose of showing the power of the Lord.
Yeah.
People will look and see what happened in Jerusalem and ask why.
Yeah.
The answer will be because they're refusing to obedience to the Lord.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Ezekiel talks about that. I'm sure some of the other prophets do as well. The purpose, people are supposed to say, hey, what happened to that people? And it's supposed to say, well, they didn't obey Yahweh their God. So this is what happened to them. So they serve as a warning as well. And so we see that God has several purposes for these people, the remnant within the remnant, and the work that they were to do. So there is question for us. I want to, yes, Brother Norman.
Some particularly, there are times when a situation will arise with people. It is not to say destroy it, but somehow it has a way of activating, separating, because they are not ready to do it. They were expecting a cushion, and they were maybe more sick of the event.
Yeah.
God sometimes wants us
Yeah.
to sit here because He has a plan.
Yeah.
And He's using situations like that to talk about His plan.
Yeah, that's correct. It's true. There are people who say, well, if things are not going well there, that means the Lord is not there, right? God is only present in places where things are going well, and that's how they measure where they should be. But that wasn't true for these people here. Well, the question for us is how are we assessing these things? Because we shouldn't stay, oh, you're somewhere, you should never leave. That's not the question. For the children of Israel, they knew God had promised that they should be there. Well, we need to find out, why are we where we are, right? We need to have those things in order. I want to see these final verses of hope, 27 to 30. And we will use this to wrap up tonight. And in the coming lessons, we'll look to how the lessons from the book of Kings points us to and teaches us to anticipate the true Son of David, the Lord Jesus Christ. But I want you to see the tiniest fraction of hope here. Verse 27 to the end, it says, now it came about in the 37th year of the exile of Jehoiachin. Remember Jehoiachin? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, king of Judah, in the 12th month, on the 27th day of the month, that Evil Merodach, king of Babylon, in the year that he became king, released Jehoiachin, king of Judah, from prison. And he spoke kindly to him and set his throne above the throne of the kings who were with him in Babylon. Jehoiachin changed his prison clothes, and had his meals in the king's presence regularly all the days of his life. And for his allowance, a regular allowance was given him by the king, a portion for each day, all the days of his life. So we are seeing Jehoiachin, who was called not a good king, an evil king by the Lord, treated well by this king of Babylon. Why do you think? Why does the author, we don't have an explanation for why the king of Babylon decided to treat him well, but why do you think the author records this detail that the king treated him well?
Is it leading up to the fact that remember how David treated Mephibosheth?
Okay, so there is, yeah, we do,
Like that.
we do
Right.
see,
Is it?
I,
Sorry.
there is that sort of pattern with David and Mephibosheth. David did that because of the covenant and love that he had with Jonathan. So nothing like that is present here, but we do see a pattern. It is there
That's
is
it, Simon.
yes.
So is he trying to show that God, that the royal line of David was being preserved, showing that God had not completely abandoned his people or his promise to Israel?
Okay, yeah, good. I think that's certainly one thing that the author is concluding the book, not with showing how God will preserve his promises to David, but showing us one glimpse. Oh, perhaps God can. Because what we saw was the death of the king and his sons at the beginning of the chapter, but now we see a king preserved in captivity. So we're saying, well, I guess the Lord could preserve the line of David. Not every seed of David has been crushed yet. And so the author shows us that as a way of saying, okay, even though the line of the kings has ended, not every son of David is dead when the book ends. So that's one thing. But specifically, yes, Sister Susan. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting detail where the men who fled to Egypt, here we're seeing kindness shown to a king of Judah in the captivity under Babylon. Now, I'm going to name this pattern for you, and I want you to tell me what it sounds like, because I think along with the patterns you guys are noticing, I think this is what the author is doing. Where do we see somebody who's taken to a foreign land, imprisoned, released from prison, and then elevated by the favor of the ruler to a place above every other ruler in the land besides himself?
Joseph.
Joseph. Oh, good. You all got it. Okay. Okay. You all got that it was Joseph. Why maybe the author giving us Joseph-like details at the end of the book where the people have gone into captivity?
Let them know there's hope
Okay.
for
Yes.
restoration.
Ah, good. Okay, so Sister Greta said in order to give them hope. Brother Norman said because of the lesson we learned from Joseph is what people mean for evil, God means for good. Yes. Okay, those. Anybody else? Few other thoughts. Those are really good. What's that? Daniel. Similar thing happens with Daniel, which is future from this point. So when we study Daniel, we'll make the connections to Joseph as well. Yeah, Joe. God's redemption of his people. What does that connect to, July? You're right. I want.
Sorry, Brother Simon, I got a distraction here.
No problem, Brother Dalton. 1 second. I'll come back to you. Yeah.
No, you go for it.
That's like the origin of all the tribes of Israel. And there's a lot of witnesses among the brothers, and even David was wrong and things like that. So, through all of it, there's a restoration that happened between Joseph and his brothers and his family, and also prosperity that comes out of that restoration.
Yeah.
That I'm really following.
Yeah, really good. There's so many details from the Joseph story that are necessary and will be repeated in the Daniel story. But definitely, God's plan is look back at what I have done in order to see what I am going to do. That's how the book ends here, because a lot of the things that we see in Joseph in his days in that story is what will need to happen again if they are to get out of this situation. So, what I'm going to summarize all of your answers as saying, and to put it into theological language, is the author concludes the story here because what he is training the people to understand is what they need is a new exodus. What God's people need is not to be led out of one place, but they need to be led out of captivity in different places. God's people need a new deliverer like Moses. They need a new Exodus event where they're led out of captivity, and they need to again go and stand in the presence of God. That's what happened after the days of Joseph. So, what we are seeing in a person treated like Joseph is, well, God can preserve you through those difficult periods because those difficult periods come before the days when the Lord heard their cry when he visited them. You remember? The Lord said to Moses, I have heard the cry of my people. I've seen. Yes, good. Yeah. So,
Simon,
yes, Lee.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good, bro.
I have this Bible that it's a study Bible, and it told me to turn to Genesis 40, which actually talked about the Joseph's interpretation of the prisoner's dream.
Yes.
And chapter 40, verse 9, kind of like stuck out to me. If it's okay, can I read it?
Yeah, please, brother.
So verse 9, it says, So the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph and said to him, In my dream there was a vine before me, and on the vine there were 3 branches, and as soon as it budded, it blossomed short forth, and the cluster ripened into grapes. Do you, based off this word, the remnant of the remnant, do you think that's the flowering that will blossom into like the grapes? Like it's that's what the writer was trying to show there, like giving us like a sign of hope.
Yeah, I think there definitely is flourishing language, whether it's from this exact verse or not. I'm not sure if the author in Second Kings is duplicating the exact language, but you are right that earlier talked about the vine dressers, and here what's talking about the king or Joseph's dream is the cupbearer to Pharaoh, and he's restored. So in the Genesis account, it's a servant of Pharaoh, not one of God's people that's restored. So I wouldn't make an exact connection, but I'm glad to see you making connections there. What I will say is the connection to the Joseph account is in the final days of Joseph, he promises, he says to his his family, he made them promise to take up his bones. Genesis 50 verse 24. Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely take care of you and bring you up from this land to the land which he promised an oath to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. Then Joseph made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. The connection the author is trying to make us put together is that, okay, the people of God are in a bad situation, but they've been in bad situations before, and God has delivered them. If you want to know what God's deliverance from this situation looks like, look to what he did previously. And so the author is ending the story, making us long for a new Moses-like figure. Remember, Moses said, God will raise up a prophet like me from among you. And remember, we're supposed to long for a true son of David. Josiah was a pretty good son of David, Solomon was a pretty glorious son of David, but they all had their flaws. There's not one of them who was yet like truly a son of God. We didn't see that. We see a little preview of some of the young men taken off into exile,
Yeah.
being like royalty, having great faith. We see different characters, like Esther, be faithful in captivity, but ultimately we will see the deliverer, the Moses-like deliverer, the David-like deliverer, the Solomon-like deliverer when we come to the New Testament. That's what this last glimmer of hope is here at the end of Second Kings, is to make us long for God to again do a wondrous thing like we know he can do. He has done it already. We need him to do it in our days. And so the anticipation is there for the original audience. And then for us also, we can ask, has God been faithful before? Has God brought revival into situations like ours? Have there been situations like our assembly where we look back to when things were really wonderful and there's so many people here, and God has taken what seemed like a dying place and brought it back to life? Well, if you don't know the stories like that, you can speak with me or some of the other brothers. There are many stories like that where God has brought a new budding, a new flourishing to places that seem like dying. And we know what God has done, he is willing to do again. And so the hope for us is God is faithful. God is powerful. God has promises he's made, and he will fulfill them no matter what our current situation is. Yes, Brother Norman. Yeah, that's good. It's a good way to phrase that, right? We don't need to look around who's the mighty nation now, who's the great enemy, where can we go get what we want? Well, we should look to the Lord. What is the Lord doing? What has he called us to do? Really good. Any questions or thoughts as we close up here? Yes, Sister Greta.
A question for
Yeah,
you.
yes.
Was Ezekiel a part of the exile, the last exile?
Yeah, very good. Ezekiel was there before the exile and throughout the exile time. He crosses over. So some portions of Ezekiel's talking about the judgment that will come, and then the promises of God now that the exile, that the discipline punishment has come.
What about Daniel? Is he there too? He was taken to
Yeah.
Babylon, wasn't he?
Yeah, Daniel was there throughout the exile, and he was waiting for the prophecies of Jeremiah to come through. Daniel chapter 12, the angel of the Lord appears to him and tells him that what Jeremiah has said will come to pass.
But they weren't able to take Jeremiah with them.
They didn't take Jeremiah. Jeremiah
He
continued.
escaped.
Correct. Yeah, Mike, you're
Now that we've come to the end of the book of Kings,
Yeah, Dalton, brother.
one second, Brother Dalton. I'll come to you right now.
looking at it like
Yes, all right. No, I'm just saying.
everything that's going on, we're constantly seeing like them failure over and over and over again, like this cycle over and over again. We're constantly seeing like God's faithfulness. And it's so much worse than what it is, because like, I was just reading Hosea this morning, like that's taking place during some of the kings that we were reading.
Yeah.
And like all of these topics where God is speaking so clearly, like passing judgment so clearly on them, and the ending was simple. Like all of these things are happening, the people are still failing.
Yeah.
It shows us the problem is there, right?
Yeah.
But also displays that God
Yeah.
really see like how great the Lord is and sovereign, because he is able to deliver no matter what situation it is. He's the one consistently working throughout history. And also like how dark we can be and how simple we can be as man.
Yeah.
All the different ways that we can fall, it doesn't matter. Like, even when it's good in one generation, the next generation might be those that tumble away.
Yeah, absolutely. When you put together the rest of the biblical history from the other prophets with what we're reading in the Kings, we see, as though the evidence of Kings alone isn't damning enough, there's so much more overwhelming evidence and evidence of God's continued speaking to the people. Don't do this. Take great care that you don't continue doing what you're doing. Don't you remember what I've done for you? God's pleading with the people, and still they continue on. So really the sinfulness of God's people is put on display, and the sovereignty of God to accomplish his purposes despite all of those things. So absolutely, that's true when we consider the prophets there. But Brother Dalton, I'm sorry, I missed what you were saying. Can you say it again?
No, you're good, you're good. I was just telling you, I took the girl out. I took her out before, but she had to come back out.
I
so
got you.
I'm sorry.
No worries, no worries.
All right,
Yeah.
it's all good.
So this is the last section of the Book of Kings that we wanted to study. I believe we'll prepare for Isaiah next, but we have a few sessions.
And Zion.
Isaiah, yeah. But we have a few sessions of reviewing Kings, okay? So Isaiah is not going to be immediately. We have a few sessions of reviewing Kings, and also we need to trace what's been happening in the story of the Bible before we move into any of the next sections, the prophets or so on, okay? So, yes.
Can I say something?
Yes, Sister Bethany.
These kings had prophets with them. I remember, is it Hezekiah had Isaiah, didn't
Yes.
listen to him,
Yes.
and then these had Jeremiah, and they just didn't listen to the prophets. So they always have a prophet of God, somebody to tell them what to do.
Yeah.
But the words fell on, dry ground, and didn't listen.
Yeah, right. And that's what we were seeing all throughout the Book of Kings is what has power? The Word of God. That's why, like, when the dead bones were thrown, the dead man was thrown in Elisha's grave. He came back to life to represent, hey, what does Elisha represent? He represents God's communication to his people, his word. So if the people who are thrown into captivity are ever have chance of life again, it's by the word of God. So yes, Sister Greta is remembering absolutely correctly. All right. Thank you, Saints, for your contributions and your questions. Let's go to our time of prayer.